Hi, and welcome to yet another episode of the MetaDev Corner. Again, I have Boro with me. Say hi, Boro.
Hi.
And today we are going to discuss this very interesting topic, to us at least, that's also very near and dear to our hearts, considering that early on in our careers we've had a very interesting experience with a proper R&D process. So, what is R&D?
Yes, I can share my experience before giving the definition, because the definition will be based on my experience. My first 3 years of professionally working as a programmer, developer, were for an outsourcing company, which basically we had like product managers and QA teams and whatnot, and they would just come to us and say, okay, this is what you need to build. And that's it. This is where the story ends. So I did this thing for 3 years. And then I have a friend who introduced me to Darko, and I joined my first R&D company. And I actually saw the beauty of doing some research beyond just doing development. So based on this experience that I have, I would define development as something that is the last step of a process where you just literally do what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
That is, write the code. And I will stick to that for development. And for research specifically, I would say the shortest definition I can come with, I would say, is figuring things out, testing a few stuff, searching online, searching for clues, and then making a decision. I know this is very vague, but I'm sure we will get into the specifics.
Yeah, like that's an interesting definition, and it's sort of very close to what I'm thinking. You probably remember like one of my favorite sentences, I keep on repeating this one, that content creation is the final step of a learning process, from one of my favorite creators out there, Salma. So R&D to me is, can be defined very similarly. Like if we define development as the final step of solving a problem, the research part is actually understanding the problem, understanding what is it that we're trying to solve and build. Now, that research part can be defined in, many different ways. If we're trying to, let's say, write a service of some kind, understand what is the problem that the service is trying to automate, for example. If we're trying to create a user interface, research our users, understand their needs and so forth before you arrive at the process of actually like cranking some code and making things happen on screen. So to me, that's it, like truly understanding the problem and then actually using the code as tool to solve that problem.
Yeah, actually, I would agree with that. And I would also say I like that definition better, because it's more aligned with research in general. It's a looser definition than what I gave, which was strictly tied to development. But I definitely agree that understanding the domain, understanding the problem, not just about development, but in general, speaking to users, speaking to teams, speaking to people, stakeholders, and ultimately make a proper decision, which at the end is just, turning in from natural language to programming language of any kind.
Yeah, basically making software happen, but by that mean like turning caffeine into code and stuff like that, the thing that PMs especially loved using a while ago. I'm not sure whether that's still the case, but it was an interesting time anyway. So okay, let's maybe start first with some not that great examples of trying to solve problems when you're trying to build software. Now, the usual way that, let's say, service-oriented companies and agencies approach to solving users or clients' needs is like, client throws something over the wall, we take that thing on this side, we're trying to solve it, and there's not really proper amount of time to understand that problem, to do the research. And have you had like any negative experiences like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would not call it negative for sure, but I would call it an experience. And it's a very constrained experience.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing where you're working under a very specific set of constraints, and somebody, usually the client, tells you, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you just go and do it. Because that's a direct request from the client, and there is nothing to debate here. There is nothing to discuss, or the client knows exactly what they need, and you just go and do it. You just basically you are offloading. The client is offloading the development cycle. In a sense, they don't know how to develop, assuming, and they are only offloading this part of the story. And so I guess it could be considered negative experience because you are working under very limited set of constraints. But I guess the most negative part about that is that it gets boring quite fast.
That's true.
So you're just like, in grunt mode, writing code.
Or as some people like calling it, code monkeying.
That's actually that's funny. I had
as demeaning as that might sound. So apologies if anyone got offended by that.
No, I actually had one coworker that used that title, code monkey, or typing monkey, or something like that. But it's exactly that. In my opinion, pure development is exactly that. Just giving the definition in the context of this talk. And when before going to the research, the one thing I really liked about this mode of working is it's kind of like a gradual moving up towards the next step. So I would say something, in my experience, I would say I'm really glad I had that experience, because I would never be able to understand the beauty of research.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious to hear your experience, if you have to share strictly pure development.
Like my bad experience example, you mean, or in general?
I would say in general, whichever you feel like sharing.
Let's start with the bad ones, I guess. I have plenty of those. I have luckily been part of R&D teams that actually did proper R&D work twice so far, and I know that people don't really get those opportunities often, especially around here, so yay me. But let's start with the bad ones anyway. I spent a large part of my career either as a freelancer or in agencies. And as it happens, there's not much of a research process to speak of. So it means that more often than not, we don't really invest enough time in understanding the problem. We simply assume that this is the problem domain. We just want some code and, something that works in production churned out, and that's it.
Yes.
And it's cycle after cycle after cycle. And it tends to produce this immense amount of technical debt. And at some point, it becomes hopelessly entangled in horrors, unspeakable horrors, and you're essentially the fifth developer down the line that inherited those eldritch horrors and stuff, and you have no hope in hell of understanding all of that tangled mess down the line, unless you invest some copious hours into that. Let's say not hours. Hours is really not accurate here. I'm talking about months. So you have to invest months to properly understand it, untangle it, and then maybe have some hope of, making the productivity cycle a bit better.
Yeah, I definitely share the same experience. But, one thing I really miss from borrowing this, in that world, in the past, things seemed so simple.
Ah, yes. They didn't they?
Yes, and I really appreciated that, because you are just working under heavy constraints and just do the thing.
Yeah.
And there is nothing to debate about. There is no need for discussions. There is no need for any sort of advanced documentation beyond basic emails. There is no need for MetaDev.
Yeah. So, we'd be out of a job, man. I mean, probably not, but still,
So yeah, I remember there was this quote. I rarely remember names. This is my design fault in my brain, but it was something along the lines of men have a special way of complicating things. And the word men obviously used to the human race as a whole, but I really like that quote. Again, I don't remember who it was, but we do. I mean, if I look my career as sort of like gradual progression, I would prefer to keep things simple. And obviously, that's not possible. And I'm really, so one thing I really I would not use a hard word like dislike, but one thing I really miss is simple solutions, which it
Okay.
gets very hard as you progress and learn more things and just get into the philosophical world and see that there is basically no good solution.
Yeah, I would hate to get into semantics here and the definition of words. It's really not one of my favorite sports,
Yeah.
but are we talking about surface level simple? Or are we talking about something that's actually simple? We spend the time to properly understand and break it down, and we can, like, with a reasonable amount of confidence, call it simple.
It's a great question. I would say when I use the term simple, I use it in the sense that first my knowledge was limited. So you just do the thing based on what you know, which is very small. And second, you are working under heavy constraints and you don't have the authority to even question those constraints. And you're not even expected to.
Yeah.
I mean, the first company was literally, here is a task in English or Macedonian, go write it in Java.
Yeah.
Or C# or whatever. And things felt so simple back then. I know obviously I missed on a lot of things that were happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But as you go behind the scenes, we'll talk more about research as we get into that and how it fits into development. But as you go deeper and deeper, you just keep opening new set of can of worms. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the deeper you go, like, more eldritch horrors like emerge. So it sort of comes with the territory, I guess. It's interesting that when you're more green, younger in your career, like, you tend to understand everything in more simplistic terms. Like, more often than not, we just care about the tech. Throw us a problem that's, take your whatever. We can churn you out a solution. We don't care about, like, what lies beneath. We don't really care about the business logic or whatever.
Yes.
Let, like, the business people care about it. At least I was like that for a longer time than I care to admit, anyway.
Probably most of us, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I guess, as you progress in your career, like, the term simple starts to take on a different meaning, I suppose.
It does. And I mean, this is not to say that I don't enjoy, these discussions like MetaDev, but it sometimes feels like the more knowledge you get, the harder things become. And there was another quote, which I don't remember at the time, but it's just, things are not becoming less complex the more you learn and the more you acquire knowledge, but I think on the opposite, they become more complex. And even when we have to make a decision, in some case, you just like, well, a decision has to be made and I made it, but it still doesn't feel right. Whereas before we had this, let's say, amount of knowledge, it was very simple. You make a decision and you're just happy. Yeah. And ignorance is bliss, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Like, but that's up to a point, up until we actually encountered and we got the freedom to, hey, here's a problem, research it. You have like an unlimited amount of time. Like, it was, at first it was shocking.
Yep.
Like, I couldn't, okay, what do you mean I have an unlimited amount of time? Well, you just have an unlimited amount of time and, go ahead and solve this problem. which was an interesting experience. Do you remember like what was the first thing we actually built with that amount of freedom? Because it's sort of fuzzy for me.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind. Okay, so just starting with some context.
Yep.
The second company where I joined, and I don't know which company that was for you. Was it third, fourth?
I'm not sure. Probably third.
Okay. So for me, yeah, the second company, I got to work with Darko and Marian Karowski on a team, which
And we'll
was
probably get him on an episode sometime.
hopefully.
We're hoping for that.
It's a tricky one, but so we were working on the three of us were working on this team, which was basically supposed to do like cutting edge R&D. And some more context: the product was building an advanced video player on multiple platforms beyond just the web. So we also had a desktop client and client on mobile devices back then. So this is the first time where I experienced what research really means, and literally, like what Darko said, something along the lines of this CEO. When I interviewed for the job, was basically, you have unlimited amount of time to do research, and when I was like, okay, I don't believe this is true, but I will buy this.
Yeah.
So, and we did a lot of interesting stuff in my opinion. So back to your question after I gave this long context. First thing I remember working with you was so we had this like I said, video player that was based on the NP API. I think that's long gone.
Yeah, this is a long gone thing. Like, it's been deprecated quite a while ago. Say Firefox version circa 4 or something like that.
What year was this about?
Oh,
I think it went along with Flash and...
I would like to say 2013, 14.
Probably.
Something like that.
Yes. Yeah. So this was back in 2012 when we did the work, and I remember even back then there were some deprecation notices.
Yeah.
But
they were very clear about, hey, this is going to die. You shouldn't use this. But
yeah.
When has that ever changed our minds?
Yeah. And so we had like this video player based on NP API, basically a browser plugin that allows you to play videos in a much smarter way. I think back then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think HTML5 and the video tag were still under heavy work in progress. So,
well, they weren't exactly a work in progress. They were standardized, but not every browser had the same idea about the implementation. So we were struggling with about a bunch of codecs, with a bunch of container formats, and Apple, as usual, were being smart. And like Safari was, very special about it. It's really a painful point for me. I don't want to get into it. So please go on.
So the CEO comes to us and says, we need to find a way to speed up the video playback process. And, this was the usual way how things got communicated to us. And we were just like literally full autonomy, freedom, and, just go and see what is there out on the field. And so I think, as far as I remember, this was the first collaboration with you where what we did was basically we used Liberia.
Yes.
Hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, Area and Area 2C was the CLI utility, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Right. So basically, Area is a torrent client. Which
HTTP and torrent client.
Right.
It did a bunch of additional stuff on top. Yeah.
But in our use case, we used the torrent functionality mostly. The idea was, okay, one way to speed up video playback was, we would reduce our server load by introducing libarea into the NP API plugin, which would, if the more clients there are viewing the same video, the more they can distribute among themselves the content that they serve. So this means faster playback in some cases, obviously, not in all, and also less load on our servers where the actual videos were hosted. So that's the first thing I remember working with you, but I know we did a lot of more interesting stuff after that with GFS. Probably we'll get into those as well.
Yeah, it was. I think that was our first collab. Like, we were a weird team. Like, it's not that we started off, I think, like with the idea of building an R&D team. Especially, it was really, we were a team of like sort of a ragtag, non-structured team that actually got the tasks that nobody else wanted. And I guess we're built that way, that we like weird problems, I suppose. And one thing led to another. We started getting into RFCs, or libraries that were really low level, that you had to transcode something to something else. You had to stream in a very special way, and one thing led to another. We became an R&D team, so sort of by mistake. But yeah, that was probably our first collab. So the point was that each of the team members at any given time didn't really work on the same projects. We worked on different things, and if there was an overlap, we got to collab, and it was really cool. It was an interesting way of working. So the thing that we actually did had to do with streaming to the browser to a plugin that was supposed to be a part of a paid, sort of like monetized video platform.
With DRM and all the
with DRM before, like, we got wiser about that. Hey, DRM's not going to work as you imagine it's going to work. I mean, people are still trying, but come on, man, DRM isn't going to work anyway. So it was sort of protected, it was monetized, but we started hitting a problem where we didn't have enough servers to go around, and CDNs weren't an option for some reason, and I'm fuzzy on that one at least. And we had the idea of using like peer-to-peer stuff, because like we had a bunch of connected clients in a closed network that was already sort of paid, and there was an expectation of them to have like at least reasonably fast connections, so we could sort of hook into that. And since the paid platform is controlling the narrative, we could probably sell that in some way. It was interesting. It worked pretty well.
Yes. Our solution was basically, it shipped to production and it really did its job. This goes back to how we started the discussion. Basically, the CEO comes to you and gives you a very vague statement, and you just build on top of that. So this vague statement, like a double-edged sword, of course. On one hand, it's harder to get around it, but on the other hand, you're working in a system with very small constraints. And I think this was the beauty of it. And also like what you mentioned, Leah, digging through RFCs and things like that. Maybe we can also chat a bit about the process. This is the tool that we built, obviously.
My thought exactly, because we've told the story, but we didn't really get into the process, and probably the process is the most interesting part of what we're trying to say.
But I think so far, at least, we, based on our experience, make a clear distinction between what pure development was and what our research was, and what how you synthesize those two. So maybe we can chat a bit about the process on the research side of things.
Absolutely. So okay, let's say, like, imagine this. Either, let's say, me or our colleague Caro, hi Caro, or the CEO comes to you and says like, hey, I want you to build me a let's say DRM'd player that's going to work inside a web browser. That's all you get as a requirement, and you have an unlimited amount of time. Go.
That's exactly how it was. And I would also like to mention a quick anecdote. The CEO was referring to us as the three little princesses.
No, that was the sysadmin dude.
Maybe both of them.
Possibly, yeah. We were special.
Yes, special. But for the process itself, okay, now having worked remotely for a very long time, and Darko as well, we'll probably dedicate a whole session to this.
Yeah, at some point.
So one thing I really miss from that experience was it was very organic, and we would drink our coffee or play Mortal Kombat on the PlayStation or whatever, and somebody, Darko would come with an idea. Hey, we should try this, and I was just like, leave the coffee and just sit on the computer right away. So it basically, I think most of the hangouts were like that, or we would have some beers or whatever within the company premises, and most of the interesting bits actually happened outside of the computer, and then you just sit on the computer and do the stuff that you need to do, which is the development part. But I think for the research part, Darko would come in and say something like, have you ever heard of Leap Area? And I'm like, no. What is that? Well, it's basically a torrent library. I'm like, let's go and figure out what it has. What can we do with it? And we just like sit and dissect it up to the point where, you start with reading documentation, obviously, code examples, try some, build some very small proof of concepts. I remember Darko built like this very tiny server on his computer, and I just cloned it to my computer as well. And we just started both services at the same time to see if they would discover each other, like a torrent, within the peer-to-peer network. And so you see the result. Hey, I see you, and you see me. So this is pure bliss. It's pure. It's a great feeling.
Yeah,
it feels like an accomplishment. So a lot of smaller things like that, and then you just take all of the small things and you just integrate them within the bigger application. But like I said, just reiterate, I really miss. I think remote will probably never be able to capture the essence of those collaboration, in-person collaborations where you're just like water cooler chat and do some pair research together, see what works, see what doesn't work, and build on top of that.
Yeah, for real. I mean, that's for me. It's I usually, when, let's say, similar scenario, somebody throws a problem at me, and I start by researching conventional wisdom. And then I start researching the fringes and see why the fringy ideas might work, might not work, and try to adapt most of what's out there towards what we're trying to actually achieve ultimately. And I don't like reinventing wheels at all, but I'm not a particularly huge fan of shoehorning things either. So if there's something reasonably low level to use, I'm probably going to use it. But if it requires an entire framework and have a server cluster somewhere, I'm probably not gonna go with that.
Yeah.
Because I like my tools simple. I like, I have probably mentioned this 100 times so far. I'm a huge fan of the Unix philosophy, and I'm a huge fan of how things were done back in Bell Labs. Essentially have these small utilities that can pipe with one another so that you don't ever have the need of, producing very complex software just from the get-go. You can solve it in a very small pieces, pipe those pieces, and produce some more complex software. I think that's a lost art by now with, us trying to over-engineer pretty much everything. But I digress. In general, try to create a pipeline of smaller stuff that's close enough to solving your problem. And when you hit that limit, when you've piped enough things and you can no longer shape those things towards your problem, write something custom on top to really fit into the entire problem area and offer it as a solution. And I think that's what we did with the area thing, and after that with the Was it libVLC that we used?
Yes, initially we used libVLC, and the CEO at one point comes to us and says, we want to be able to offer clients to be able to view videos in a frame accurate fashion.
Oh, right.
So this was one of
God,
the
man, yeah.
most vague requirements, and we were like, well, okay, we use libVLC, which is basically, like you said, another abstraction on top of libffmpeg, libff. So yeah, over engineering. The cycle continues. But libVLC basically abstracted a lot of stuff, and it did not give us the option to. Did not give us the control over the codec, the video codec that we needed, so that we could say, okay, stop the video at exactly frame 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So we did the transition or migration from VLC to libff, and at this point, and this is interesting actually, because what you said about research beyond just, obviously we did not, without reinventing the wheel, by implementing your own video player would be, definitely impossible, or spend a couple of years writing a video and audio as well, encoder, decoder. So we decided to reuse this, and obviously open source. And at this point, the research itself was about, so libff back then, I don't know if things changed today, but it had basically no documentation. So the only thing was you just go and dig into the source code.
There were man files, so
Yeah, but very high level.
But as far as man files go, it's not very detailed.
And then you also have so libff is basically a framework that has a lot of a support for a lot of different formats and codecs. I think the one we mostly dealt with was MP4, if I remember correctly, back then.
Yes, MP4 and something else for Apple devices. They had something.
Maybe QuickTime.
Yes, QuickTime. Oh my God, I'm so happy that's dead. Anyway.
And the whole research, so there are a lot of different degrees to doing research. It's one thing if you do browsing through RFCs, obviously documentation, checking out code examples. When that is not an option, you're dealing with an open source project, dig through the source code, which is much more difficult. Trying yourself to build this picture around the code base of libff and whatnot. And then there is the other another perspective, which is closed source. I don't remember the exact code that we were working with, but it was basically closed source. I remember we received tons of documentation about it, but it was very high level, and so this is all blurry.
It's very blurry. I remember that happening, but I don't remember exactly what it was about.
So the client was Technicolor, and they had their own video format or whatever. So
no, they had their own container format. Or was it a video format?
Maybe both. It's very blurry, but I remember us.
We're old. I mean, come on.
So at this point, when you're dealing with closed source and you just try to understand something, the only tool you have basically is reverse engineering.
Yeah.
And this is in my opinion, the most time-consuming tool, but the most satisfactory one, assuming you make progress.
Yeah. You can hit a lot of walls when you're trying to reverse engineer something, and you have to be really persistent.
Exactly. So, and at this time is where when personally I saw the beauty of what research really is. That there is a whole new other world beyond just development, and it was fun because you are just collaborating with different people whom you share biases with.
Yeah, of course.
So I think genuine curiosity is very important for this.
Yeah.
But you are learning a lot. I mean, for me myself, I I feel like it came out of that company like with tons of knowledge, both about technologies, but also about the beauty of research. Obviously, it was this progression from a very simple development only world into R&D, where now you are faced with, well, I know about this solution, but is there a better solution? So you're to the mode of doing, you're basically habituated to do more and more research, whereas
That's true.
previously it was a different habit.
Yeah, I am still off, and sometimes I've been, judged as being too slow with building something just because of that habit. Like, when I'm trying to work on something, I'm trying to truly understand it first. And yes, sometimes that might take more time, but personally, I think it's worth it because once you truly understand the problem, any addition to sort of like additive problem to that core problem later will take significantly less time if you invest the initial time to truly understand the core of the problem.
I agree from an aspect of companies and what companies are optimizing for. I definitely agree with that. That obviously doing research and before making a decision is much better than just making a decision.
Yeah.
But I think also another interesting aspect to consider is the developer experience, or maybe not this as a very general term, but mostly in the sense how and what does the developer feel like at the moment. Because I think there is this, to me it was implicit up until a few years ago, where like I mentioned, felt like this huge progression, but at the same time it also felt like I have this new tool in my toolbox, but it sort of paralyzes me up to a point where I guess the biggest blocker for me, even to this day, I don't think I've gotten past that, is how deep and how far do you go research? So I think this is a very tricky question, because if you don't balance research and development, it will obviously be either full research or either full development on the spectrums. But if you balance those, you up until some point you have to cut it. You have to say, I've done some amount of research and I need to make a decision.
Yes, but that probably goes hand in hand with like, you have an idea, and in order to validate that idea, you would have to try something. You have to experiment with, the practical aspects of that idea. So this is similar. You research something, you try to build something with it. Maybe it doesn't work. Back to the drawing board, back to doing some more research. Then try something. Next time it sticks. And after that, you can additively build on that.
That is true.
And you have to take into consideration that sometimes you will fuck it up at the 5th iteration, maybe. And like everything before that basically goes out. But that's not a bad problem to have, because you're probably trying to solve something that's worth solving.
No, yeah, for sure. I completely agree. It's not a bad problem to have. I will make the analogy with the toolbox. So in my toolbox, I had only development as a tool, and now I also got, back then I got introduced to research as a tool. But now the thing is, you are feeling so good when you're using the research, let's say drill, whatever, and you don't want to go back to development. You just want to, there was this or maybe even today it happens with me, the problem with perfection. How far do you go researching? When do you cut it? When do you say this is enough info for going back to development? So it's not a bad problem to have, but I think it introduces more problems, because, we started the discussion, pure developer, pure doing only development, very simple world. Everything feels interesting, not interesting, but maybe everything feels rewarding, let's say. And now you have a new tool which also gives you more responsibility, and it's really up to you to decide when you need to do the cut and when you need to go back to development. So it's not making things simpler.
Yeah. But it's the balancing act thing. Like, perfect is the enemy of good, and good enough is the enemy of actually good.
Yep.
So
Yep, exactly. And so yeah, after I got this tool in my toolbox, for me personally, I just kept on using it even to this day. And I still meet some let's say close relatives, like mostly older person, my grandmother, let's say, and they would ask me like very simple questions like, when is the next bus going to arrive at this station? And I'm like thinking to myself, well, you can easily check this for yourself, but and so yeah, this thinking in the research aspect definitely increases your pool of knowledge and your chance or your ability to acquire to even further extend this pool of knowledge. But it's and even when working with coworkers, like some questions they ask would feel like very simple, and I'm like, sometimes I would give like explicit feedback, like, well, this is one Google away or things like that.
yeah.
But I don't want to go too meta on the research topic, but I guess the next step is to figure out like, how do you spread the research spirit among people. So to me, this is a thing I'm constantly thinking of. And my sister or my wife, for example, who are not that tech savvy, would nudge me for things like, my phone doesn't turn on, and I'm like, have you tried plugging it into a charger? Or like very basic troubleshooting kind of, which I feel came as knowledge based on research. And like you said earlier in the podcast, trying to understand things at a fundamental level. So yeah, on the one hand, it feels really good to be able to solve problems, but on the other hand, I think it just generates more problems.
No, that's true. There has to be a cutoff, of course, in order for it to make sense. Cool. So I wanted to ask you something like, did you ever have like any sort of comparable or similar experience after we stopped working at that company?
I would say so. There are many things in play here. First, after this company, I worked very briefly for another company, a couple of months. And after that, I started working remotely. So yeah, since 2014, fully remote now, almost 10 years, I would say I have not. Mostly because, when you transition to work remotely, there are some things that you're trading. So you gain a lot of things, and also at the same time, you lose some of the things. So I think this experience, and now I'm very obviously very habituated to working remotely after doing it for so long. But and I don't think I would go back to an office, but I don't know, things change, so we'll see. But I don't think that experience can be exactly replicated. Obviously the company culture came into play, so it was very light, like very kind of hacker space style company where nobody micromanages you, nobody cares when you arrive at the premises or when you leave them. If you feel like that, I remember there was a PlayStation console and a lot of beers in the fridge and a lot of coffee. So it was very, like obviously a startup, but I would not say this experience is easily replicable, mostly because also I've gotten older, and the amount of energy I invested, basically we would usually start our day at 9 or 10 a.m. and then end up home at 9 or 10 p.m.
Yeah,
So,
that happened. Yeah, that tended to happen.
and obviously, this requires a lot of energy, and it requires you having a lot of freedom as a youngster.
Yeah.
And but I have not been able to replicate the exact same thing, but parts of that for sure. Like, I really enjoyed the autonomy, the freedom, the ability to be able to do research, write research results, document them, share them with people, make a decision. Those things for sure. But the whole kind of the whole structure, the whole vibe to it, I would say probably not reproducible. So I have not. What about yourself?
Actually, I did. I had pretty long running experience after that. You probably remember that company that I did some assistive technologies and stuff like that.
I do.
That
Was that a remote position?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. So still similar, but not exactly.
It's no, not exactly. Not in spirit. Maybe like I didn't have many colleagues that I was in a physical space with. I did have some, and it was a very good experience with them. But for the most part, for the largest amount of that time, I was pretty much solo. It wasn't bad at all because I had the freedom to truly research and understand the problem before trying to apply a solution to it. And it worked pretty well. It's not that you produce the perfect code. We managed to screw some things up significantly. And we went through a couple of, not big refactors, but there were some refactors. There were some really big walls that we've hit. But we sort of chose to trust the process. Sometimes it took a lot of time. It's fine. And it's also fine when you're trying to sort of explore and map a problem space that hasn't exactly been explored properly before. And this was such a case. So it, spoken like a true senior, it depends, of course. But in general, I see value in doing things a bit slower from the get-go in order to truly invest in understanding them. And you as a person and a professional growing comfortable and accustomed to the problem space and all of it. When you start working in a new problem space, right, you don't really understand the entire logic or the inner workings or the whys of that problem space. You don't understand how the people operate inside that space, right? You don't have the big picture. You just have a bunch of tasks or tickets or whatever, but you don't have the larger context. And the larger context is really helpful in informing you on how to really solve a certain problem, what choices would be the right choices there. So I would just like to round this sort of line of thinking with, you're trying to, you're being paid to solve problems. You're hired to solve problems, and coding is a tool for solving those problems. You don't really have to see yourself as a glorified typewriter, essentially.
Yeah, and it's a great story because but at the same time, like you said, exploring, I usually the first thing that comes to my mind when I use the word research is exploring dungeons, mostly because I played RPGs as a small kid, but and exploring those dungeons or mazes or whatever definitely gives you more more views, more perspectives. But at the same time, I would make the comparison here where going back to the previous topic about doing research remotely and then doing research in person in an office, without going too deeper, because I think we might have a whole episode dedicated to this.
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, and I want to use the analogy of exploring dungeons or mazes. When I feel like, in my experience, when we worked in together in this company and we had the chance to do the research together,
Yeah.
it felt like you are walking through these mazes and then discovering things as a as a group.
Yeah.
So moving together forward.
Sounds like D&D.
Yeah, exactly. I have played like 2 or 3 D&D games in my life, but it did look very similar when I played those. And comparing remote, there is this aspect in remote which is, I think, quite tricky. Asynchronous communication, cutting feedback loops.
Yeah.
So I would say it is nearly impossible to do research as a group in longer periods. Of course, you can have like, an hour per programming session or whatever, but it's not something that, whereas with you and with Marian, we were working in the same office and you were literally supposed to be there to do any work. So there is no option. You are researching dungeons or exploring or traversing dungeons as a group. No other option. And in remote, I feel like you're mostly on yourself, where you just like, do the whole dungeon traversal, you come back with research results, and then somehow these research results, like a map that was explored, needs to fit, like with what you said in the previous discussion, needs to fit with the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is basically a sequence of different maps.
Yeah.
But and I would not say I prefer this type of work or that type of work. I am just saying that they're different, and sometimes working remotely can give you the feeling of feeling alone, because you're supposed to run a lot of simulations inside your head, run a lot of different scenarios, basically exploring the dungeon or map or whatever, and then make decision based on that. Whereas as a group, it feels like through dialogue, you are essentially solving a problem together, whereas the other one is mostly monologue. But then on the other hand, being in the office all the time definitely cuts a lot of the flexibility, like having to take my kids to school or do some grocery shopping, or out of nowhere, random, I want to take a shower at 1 p.m., which is not always possible in the office. At least we did not have showers back then. I don't know if offices nowadays, maybe they have showers.
I could imagine like fancy startups with that as well. There's the Googles of the world, so they do have showers,
even bedrooms and things like that.
No, but still, like, we should probably dedicate an entire episode to like remote, in person, and stuff like that.
There is a lot of.
We are getting into that quite a bit.
Yeah, but I would say, in general, just research is a great tool to have in your toolbox, but it's at the same time, by using research, expect to increase your tool set in your toolbox by infinitely. So it just brings more solutions, but also more problems. That's what I would
still. But it's necessary regardless. Like, you are going to see more problems, but that's fun. That's fine, and that comes with the territory, I would say. So okay, yesterday we saw a presentation about RFCs. So we didn't really get into those a lot. So do you have some? Because sometimes, or often, RFCs are used as a basis for implementing stuff. Once they come to, being, let's say, just documents that are not that alive, that people don't really have many comments to leave on, and they're used as, this a source of truth, let's say. Do you have some experience working with RFCs and implementing stuff based on them?
I would first start with, so yesterday was Beer.js December 2023, probably the last one for this year.
Yes.
And I would also say kudos to Stoyan for a very great presentation. He did talk in depth about RFCs and how they use those at Supabase, the company he's working for. So just setting the context. And obviously there are different ways RFCs can be used. And I think at the same time, actually, they are a very good research tool.
Yeah.
But with the prerequisite that you already did some research yourself, you are coming with this unfinished idea and you're presenting it to other people so that you can get their comments, or like what Stoyan said, I really like that, a request for thoughts, not comments, because comments are like can be grammar thing,
or like
you
it's very
should
superficial,
right.
And
But the most important thing, in my opinion, is getting thoughts from other developers based on your research findings.
Yeah.
So you have a set of research findings and you have a goal that you want to achieve. So this is basically can be considered as an RFC. I wouldn't get too deep into what RFC is or could be, but we can maybe work on that definition.
Mm-hmm.
And at Automatic, we do use RFCs a lot. Had the experience of using them, and they are basically being used exactly the way as I described the definition. So people would come with like almost fully baked ideas, and which is ready to present in front of other people, and just basically, here is what I have, just give me your thoughts. So I would also make the comparison with the company that you and I worked on in, and we use no RFCs, no documentation at all. But the thing is, there was no need for that, because
think so, yeah,
all the research happened in person, either when we had lunch together or coffee break or beer break or whatever. And we just like through the dialogue, we just built the RFC in our minds, up to the point where sometimes we would collectively hallucinate, which is very interesting.
Yeah, that did happen too.
But working remotely, especially at Automatic, this mode of working is not possible. So we use RFCs a lot, and they have to have, in order for you to receive some comments or thoughts from people, you actually have to present your findings, and so that others can build on top of that.
Yeah.
Whereas you cannot really just start with, hey, what if we build a peer-to-peer network in our video player? So you don't start an RFC like that. I mean, you could start it like that within your head, and then in
theory.
But in working remotely, you just have to like really understand and put some clarity into the idea yourself first before sharing it with others. But definitely a really good research tool. I would not say the only one. There are obviously it's part of documentation, can be used as a documentation, but definitely requires a lot of, depending on the RFC, of course, there are different levels of RFCs, but definitely requires some amount of research before being able to write one. And as for the process for writing RFC, I think we might have a whole different episode about that, which is
we should probably invite Stoyan over for that one.
Yeah, but technical writing, content generation in general, I think is a whole different topic, and covers very interesting bits like how do you engage the audience.
Yeah, it's a whole different rabbit hole. Like it deserves probably more than one episode unto itself. So
would prefer not to get too deep into that, but very interesting topic. And I would say, even though research is a prerequisite, actually to write a really good RFC takes more than just research.
Yeah, for sure.
And probably can leave it at that. Leave it at that, unless you have something more to add to the RFCs.
No,
discussion.
not really. I don't really have a lot of experience writing them. I did write some for some proposals, but I've had some great experiences implementing stuff based on RFCs. For example, the TUS uploader, TUS, which there is some effort currently to actually make it a part of some web standard. And
Probably for 10 years that's been ongoing.
No, actually it's pretty new. Like it's been a thing that's been used in some companies and stuff. There's a whole lot of implementations for various servers, but last year or something about that, there was this effort to actually make it a part of some web standard.
Can you remind me, was this the thing about resumable downloads?
Yeah, resumable uploads.
Resumable uploads, exactly.
Yes, that was it. And it was beautiful in that it was a very simple document. You know, there were like shoulds and musts about that mapped really neatly to HTTP requests, and that in turn mapped to how you can translate those on a client and a server. And this was back in like 2015, something like that. And, you know, we still had to fight Internet Explorer back then. And this thing was sort of a breath of fresh air for me personally, because I got to implement something that just made sense, was simple, and I didn't have to fight a bunch of browsers and browser standards for it to work. So yeah, I would like to just, you know, kudos to us. You guys did a great job.
And I think this is a great example, you know, that RFCs can indeed be used differently. Obviously, you know, one thing is the documentation aspect. The other one is, could it be used as a design document? Is it really just like research results? And I think you will not find a single definition for what RFC is. But I can make a comparison with PHP source. So this PHP core and how they use RFC. They basically use RFCs so they have like this voting mechanism, which I believe was 2/3. So in my opinion and in my experience, as far as I saw, the way PHP core uses RFCs is to just make a decision about a particular design, either addition or change or deletion, and then, you know, comes the voting process, RFC accepted or rejected, and that's it. This is where the RFC but the interesting bit is that you won't find this RFC referenced in any of the docs. As far as I saw, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I never have I seen any references to PHP RFCs in the PHP docs documentation. So, you know, they use it just as a way to make a decision. And the way you described it is really, interesting, and I would also say important, because if an RFC gives you, just what you need to design a system or a part of a system, along with research results and things like that, and like the experience you had with us, if you can just like really look at an RFC and be able to go back and implement it, I think that's a great example for a very well written RFC.
Yeah.
I had the chance to work with a coworker on who is basically building an HTML parser in WordPress, and the HTML specifications are very vague. I don't remember the exact details, but it was something with inner and outer HTML, and the RFC standards for this basically have a hole, like a literal gap that is undefined, and you see different behavior in Safari or in Firefox. And obviously there is probably a good reason why this was written that way, because it's probably a complex problem, but this is where, it becomes much trickier to navigate, where like I said, don't remember the exact details, but I think it had something to do with escaping out of the HTML fragment by either using inner or outer HTML. And so this worked in Chrome, or you were not able to escape out of it, but you could do it in Safari. And if you go to the RFC, there is a gap. So unlike TAS, what do you do in cases like this? It's really up to the designers of the system to make a decision. And this is why we have tons of browsers with different behaviors nowadays.
And edge cases and stuff. But yeah, an RFC is a tool ultimately, and as a tool it can be used imperfectly or wrongly, so it's a tool.
Yeah,
that's the bottom line.
For sure, I definitely agree, and I'm not saying that all RFCs should literally have zero gaps, but the biggest disadvantage, the biggest trade-off of using RFC as a design document is unless it's TAS or some proper
the good examples out
there, you will probably arrive to the point where you have to say, or you find yourself where this is not documented. I have to make this decision myself, and the burden comes on you.
Yeah, essentially. Cool. So I think we covered it, or do we have something more to say on this topic? Maybe something about spreading research culture. How do we make that more a part of everyday developers' lives? Because I feel there's a distinct lack of it, especially around here. Like most of what I'm seeing, especially in service-oriented companies, is that they just churn solutions. They don't take too much time to understand and provide additional value. And I mean, I get the business part, sure, but you have to invest in quality as well, and you have to invest in your developers' toolboxes as well in order for them to become better and in turn produce better stuff. So
I think it's a great question, and there are two distinctions to be made. First is the distinction, like, what is the intended outcome? So if somebody came here in this room and asked me and you, what are you guys doing? Well, we are basically doing this thing. Well, and obviously the most common next question would be, does it bring any money? So we would say no, for sure, at least until now. So that's one distinction, and the other distinction is, when you're in a company, obviously you're trying to convince CEO, CTO why they should start doing research. I guess the first question would be, does it bring any money?
What's the value?
What's the value, right? So to me, the way I see it, first, research is a very natural progression. You cannot force somebody to do research, but you can show them the beauty of what research gets you or can get you. And so it has to, at some point it has to come from the person doing the research. Even if you were able to convince the CTO that they should include research in their processes or whatever, if the people within the organization are not curious enough to dig deeper and understand different solutions, you will have convinced the CTO, but then you have to convince the other.
Yeah, probably it has to do with culture, and it has to do with the person that you're trying to convince. Right. You're probably not going to be able to convince everybody that, hey, this is a great idea, but that's probably fine, because not everybody would be convinced that this is a great tool to use.
Right.
Some people would be fine without it.
Right. And it's a great question. I mean, you also mentioned agencies, and agencies, especially, I think, have this they have this like usual cycle of work, not cycle, but usual pattern. So if you were to take random 10 agencies, you will notice one pattern. which I found was they found the thing that works best for them,
Mm-hmm.
and they just get very they stick to it. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is necessarily bad. It's a good thing, but I think introducing research, both in the aspect of technologies you're
Mm-hmm.
using, but also in the aspect of what processes is this company using, or how are they making decisions. Let's do some research. Let's
Yeah.
figure out what are the alternatives. Can even if you think you have a very good process, or even if we think we have like very good setup with this podcast here, obviously you and I, mostly I would say mostly you do research very often and experiment with things. What if we put the lighting there? What if you sit there? No. And so I think there
I'm
is
learning. So
yeah, and exactly. So research really gives you the opportunity to learn and grow. And even if you are convince yourself that you're, as an agency or even a big company, I don't know, have like the best processes and whatever, still research can give you deeper insights, what things can be improved and what things should be kept. So I think it's a very, in my opinion, very valuable tool to solve problems, but also introduce more problems.
yeah, but sure, it's this thing that inspires progress. So like it makes you leave a comfort zone. It makes you try to see a problem from multiple angles. And personally, I think there's a lot of value in that. Like you create better professionals that way. You create better seniors and better leaders that way. So you're not just, take a junior, teach them to code, and they'll be code monkeying like forever and ever and ever. Like that's not really a great idea and not really a great future for your own company. Like, I could probably make a money argument here as well. Yes, there is a certain investment in this, even a monetary investment, but long term that really comes back and pays back for you as a company in general. So
yeah, and all of the things, it's very hard to generalize because it depends on the company size, on
sure.
a lot of the company culture.
Yeah.
So but in general, I would definitely agree and say that if you, at least if you have reached up until a point where you feel like this starts to feel kind of boring, maybe the best time to start focusing more on research, because and I would also generalize this not only in the IT world but in life in general. When you get bored from particular thing that you're doing, like I don't know, cooking or whatever it is, drawing, you can start doing some other things. Like I very interesting for myself. I did not used to read a lot when I was younger, but now I started reading more and more, and I figured out that it's a great way to increase my knowledge, because previously it was mostly trial and error, and both of those are different aspects of research. But having researched the way I research is also interesting, and I found out that this is more optimal, let's say. Reading books versus building all the things yourself. So I would definitely say, if at some point a company gets the feeling like this is boring, or maybe not boring also, but things like how can we make it more interesting, like what you said, or maybe even use it as a tool to motivate people. And it requires, like I said, it requires an adventurous spirit, right?
Yeah.
So it requires the person's curiosity to go and research dungeons and whatever, especially those that were not intended to be explored.
Yeah.
Reverse engineering. And if it does not come from the person themselves, it could feel like something that you are forcing people to do. Now, the bigger question is, how do you sell this, or how do you show the beauty of this, which I have not found the answer to yet. But I would be very interested to find out that one. Hopefully by doing more research.
No, for real, I don't really have like anything to add to that. It's sort of, it's very mysterious to me as well. I just don't have anything smart to say there.
It's we're basically jumping into the philosophical realm, but at the same time, even if I had the tool to convince somebody who did not want to do research, but and I could change their minds right away, I don't think it's a great tool to have, because I would prefer if it came from themselves. Otherwise, it would still feel like something that I literally micromanage in a way. So a proper research has to be done with, let's say, let me put it in the most cliche way. Proper research has to be done with love. So I will.
The secret ingredient is love.
Yeah. So yeah, curiosity, all of those bits. I think, if you don't have the love for the thing, you are interested in how that works, you really want to dissect it, then maybe not there yet. Maybe just continue doing what you're doing, and when you feel it is a need, it's also important to figure out what is it that people enjoy doing. So if so you and I share a lot of biases. This is why conversations are most easy. They go very easy between us. But if we were to introduce a junior here right now, or even a more senior person than us, either extreme, doesn't matter. How do you convince a junior that research is a good tool unless they themselves felt that?
Maybe we should try it as an experiment, see what happens. I don't know.
No, but when I was a junior myself, I just literally felt really good when I just wrote something, compiled, and executed.
Yeah.
This is the feeling I was chasing. And so if this imaginary junior sits between us, and who is a person that chases the feeling of compile, run, works, then they're just not there yet. Or even a more senior person, who probably some wizard kind of person that would come here to us and say, you should not do research, probably came up full circle. So yeah, it's I think it's basically, it's important for people to align themselves and make sure they are sharing the journey.
Yeah.
So I would say introduce research at the point you feel like should be introduced.
All right, cool. So maybe that's an interesting closer, because we've been at this for quite a while now. So, okay, sort of to wrap this up, we've done books twice now before. Let's do games now. What are you currently playing?
I have pre-ordered Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? Tears of the Kingdom. A long time ago, but I was so busy during the past period, and I'm really hoping now during the holidays to spend some time playing with it. But short answer is nothing really. Maybe just a quick chess game here and there, but nothing too serious. Mostly because of lack of time.
Right.
And yourself?
Well, I'm trying to. I'm sort of at the end of the first chapter of Baldur's Gate 3. And I'm trying to invest more time in it, but it's sort of a struggle. I usually end up on the couch with Netflix and similar stuff. Sometimes even books when I have the energy for that. But yeah, I'm trying to play Baldur's Gate, and I'm sort of doing some D&D games as well. So I'm pretty happy with, general my general gaming life. So that's cool.
So Baldur's Gate is an RPG, right?
Yes.
Okay, this speaks to the shared biases that you and I have, but yeah. I can probably leave it at there.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty deep into anything D&D and RPG. I'm very probably my longest running hobby, or I'm not sure if I even get to call it a hobby anymore. It's sort of more than that.
But I don't want to, probably we can discuss this indefinitely, but just one last question.
Sure.
What is it that you feel like draws you to this kind of games? Because I have the same feeling. And I think there is a very interesting research aspect to it.
The endless complexity.
The endless complexity and the...
But there's a like sort of a caveat to that. The endless complexity that allows you to get infinitely creative, and like you can tell stories, you can collaboratively tell stories, you can do a bunch of interesting things in a way that wouldn't really translate to the real world well. You can play a werewolf, for God's sake. Like you can do stuff like that. It's weird, it's creative, it's a workout for your creative brain, and
okay, I like that.
It presses a
mental
lot of
gymnastics.
it presses a lot of buttons for me personally, and I'm not sure whether I can put it in a couple of sentences. It will probably require a bunch of time. So
yeah, definitely agree on the mental gymnastics part, and I think we are going back in circles now.
Yeah.
Where I mentioned previously the quote, "Men have a special way of complicating things."
We do.
But maybe a topic for a different session is complexity required for creativity.
That's a very interesting.
It's a deep question, so
yeah, we will discuss it. I'm going to write that one down, and it's going to be an episode at some point. We have a bunch of those, so we're not going anywhere. So with that, I guess we can close this one. So this has been Boro. My name is Darko. Thank you for being with us in this MetaDev Corner episode. See you next time.
thank you. Bye.